Ritchie Blackmore wrote Woman from Tokyo while he was miserable. He hated the singer. He hated the sessions. The band had stopped talking to each other like human beings. Everything was passive aggression, missed cues, withering looks across studio console. They were recording in Rome in the summer heat, making what would become, by almost universal consensus, the worst album of their career. He didn't want to be there. Everyone in the room knew he didn't want to be there, and in the middle of all of that, checked out, resentful, running on empty, he wrote one of the greatest hard rock songs of the 1970s. That's not an accident. That's not luck. That's what it looks like when someone is so far above the baseline that their worst day still beats everyone else's best. And if you want to understand how that's possible, what Blackmore actually had that other guitarists didn't, this album, the one probably nobody talks about, is where the answer lives. There's a phrase that gets thrown around when a lot of people discuss who do we think we are, and it's the phrase phoning it in. Critics used it in 1973. Fans use it now. Blackmore himself, in his more candid moments, has essentially confirmed the diagnosis. The record was made under duress, without enthusiasm, by a band that was fracturing at every seam and had been on the road so long that the road had started to feel like a prison sentence. So yes, by the standards of Ritchie Blackmore, Who Do We Think We Are represents a diminished effort. Compared to Machine Head, it's a sleepwalker. Compared to the volcanic, precise, almost supernaturally focused guitar work on Smoke on the Water or Highway Star or Space Truckin', the playing on this album has a looseness, a flatness, a going through the motions quality that is genuinely audible if you know what you're listening for. But here's the thing about phoning it in, that the criticism always glosses over. It assumes the phone is being operated by someone ordinary. When Ritchie Blackmore phones it in, he's calling from a place most guitarists never visit. The connection might be bad, the signal might be weak, he might be distracted, disengaged, emotionally checked out, but the call is still coming from Ritchie Blackmore, and that changes everything. And to understand what that actually sounds like on tape, what it means in practice, you have to go back to where he came from. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what Blackmore's bass line actually looks like. Ritchie Blackmore is not a guitarist who succeeded through feel alone, though he had feel in abundance. He's not a guitarist who succeeded through sheer aggression, though the aggression was always there. What made Blackmore genuinely unusual would put him in a category with Page and Beck and Hendrix, while being distinctly stubbornly himself, was the combination of classical discipline and rock instinct that ran through everything he played. He grew up studying classical guitar. He absorbed the architecture of Bach, the counterpoint, the mathematical precision of melodic construction, and then he plugged into a Marshall stack and turned it into something that could level a concert hall. His solos weren't just fast, they were structured, they went somewhere. They had a beginning, a development, a resolution. Even when he was being aggressive, even when he was being wild, there was a logic underneath the noise that separated him from the legions of technically capable but ultimately directionless rock guitarists of his era. That architecture doesn't dissolve under pressure, and what happens when it's tested, and I mean actually tested, is the whole point of this record. That foundation doesn't disappear when you're tired. It doesn't evaporate because you're unhappy with your singer or resentful of your schedule or creatively disengaged. From the album you're being asked to make, the muscle memory is too deep, the instincts are too ingrained. Ritchie Blackmore could no more make a fully, truly incompetent guitar record than a concert pianist could sit down at a keyboard and forget how to play a scale. What exhaustion cost him on Who Do We Think We Are was an inspiration. What it could never cost him was ability. And the distance between those two things, it turns out, is still quite a lot of guitar playing. The only honest way to make this argument is to actually walk through the album. Not to cherry pick the highlights and ignore the wreckage, but to go track by track as it is and show you exactly where Blackmore's floor sits, even when the ceiling has caved in. Woman from Tokyo is the opening track, and it's almost cruelly unfair way to start the album this inconsistent because it's genuinely great. That descending opening riff, simple, inevitable, perfectly weighted, arrives like a statement of intent that the rest of the album never quite lives up to. The solo is melodic, restrained, and precisely placed. It serves the song instead of overpowering it. For a man allegedly sleepwalking through these sessions, Blackmore sounds awake, alert, and completely in command. If the whole album sounded like this, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Johnny, not to write such trash, and said it was a waste of public.
Mary Long follows, and this is where the cracks begin to show. Though even here, the guitar work is far from embarrassing. The riff is serviceable, the track chugs along with a workman-like energy, but there's a sense of recycling happening, of Blackmore reaching into a bag of tricks he's used before rather than finding something new. It's the first moment on the album where you sense the absence of hunger. The song isn't bad, it's just unmemorable in a way that nothing on Machine Head was unmemorable. And that contrast is damning. But damning compared to what? The track that follows makes the question even sharper and more uncomfortable. Super Trooper, not to be confused with the ABBA song of the same name that came out years later, is essentially a vehicle for Ian Gillan to do some vocal acrobatics over a blues framework that Blackmore constructs competently but without much apparent enthusiasm. The solo is brisk and technically tidy, but there's no story being told. It's notes filling space rather than notes building something. This is phoning it in genuinely, and even here, the phone call is cleaner and more articulate than most guitarists manage when they're even trying. Then comes a track where a Blackmore singer takes a shot at him on the record by name while they're barely speaking, and Blackmore's response is the most revealing thing he plays on the whole album. Smooth Dancer is interesting mostly for what it represents lyrically, widely interpreted as Gillan taking a barely veiled shot at Blackmore himself, which, given that the two men were barely speaking during these sessions, gives the track a kind of unintentional documentary quality. Blackmore's guitar response to being essentially insulted on his own album is to play the track at the same level of engagement he might bring to a sound check. Whether that's restraint or revenge is genuinely unclear. The riffing is mechanical, the solo perfunctory, but listen to the tone. Even disengaged, the sound Blackmore gets out of his guitar, that particular combination of attack and warmth, is something that most players spend years chasing and never catch. The Rat Bat Blue is the album's most underrated track and the second strongest argument for the prosecution after Woman from Tokyo. There's a looseness to the groove here that actually works in the song's favor. It feels lived in rather than lazy, bluesy rather than half-finished. Blackmore's solo opens up in a way that suggests he momentarily forgot he was supposed to be miserable and just played. There are phrases in there that belong in conversations about his best work. It's a track that rewards a second listen and a third, but right at the album's most underrated moment comes the most deflating one, and that contrast is almost too on the nose. Place in Line is probably the album's low point from a guitar perspective, a mid-tempo trudge that goes through the expected motions without generating any heat. The riff is functional, the solo is brief and uncommitted. It's a track that critics played when they want to make their case against the album, and you can understand why. Even here, though, the chord choices are intelligent, the construction is clean, and the playing is technically sound. It's just the equivalent of a master chef making toast. Competent, fine, completely beneath him. Our Lady closed the album on an unexpectedly tender note, a ballad by Deep Purple standards, with Blackmore showing a soft touch that he deployed rarely enough that it always landed when he did. The guitar work here is genuinely moving in places, melodic and restrained in a way that suggests the man still had emotional reserves he simply wasn't accessing for the bulk of the album. It's a quiet, slightly melancholy ending to a quiet, slightly melancholy record, and it works better than it has any right to. Go back through those 7 tracks and ask yourself a question on how many of them does Blackmore play something that your favorite non-elite guitarist, someone good, someone committed, someone giving everything they have, couldn't match on their best day. The honest answer, if you're being rigorous about it, is most of them. Even the weakest track on this album features guitar work that is tonally beautiful, structurally intelligent, and technically beyond reproach. Blackmore's mechanics don't fail him once. His instincts, even suppressed by exhaustion and resentment, keep producing things worth hearing. The bass line never drops below a level that most guitarists would be proud to call their ceiling, which leaves one question that the album's defenders never quite get around to answering, and it's an uncomfortable one. Here's what the existence of Woman from Tokyo and the Rat Back Blue and even the Quiet Grace of Our Lady on this album actually implies, if you follow the logic all the way to the end. If Blackmore, at his most disengaged, in his worst professional circumstances, on his least inspired album, can produce tracks of that caliber, what does it say about the guitarists who were giving everything they had and not reaching that level? It says something uncomfortable. It says that talent at a certain altitude operates independently of effort in a way that's genuinely unfair to everyone beneath it. Most musicians cannot afford to phone it in, because when they do, the result sounds like phoning it in. The floor of the ability and the ceiling of their motivation are close enough together that the gap is audible. Blackmore's floor is somewhere the rest of us can't easily see from the ground. In a strange way, Who Do We Think We Are is one of the most revealing documents in Blackmore's catalog. More revealing in some ways than his masterworks. But here's the question that sits underneath all of it. The one that makes this album more uncomfortable than anyone gives it credit for. What does a musician actually look like when the conditions are genuinely wrong? Not romantically wrong, brutally wrong. The record answers it, and the answer says something most people aren't ready to hear about talent. Machine Head tells you what Ritchie Blackmore could do when everything was aligned. The songs, the energy, the lineup, the moment, all of it came together, and the result was a landmark record. Of course it's great. You'd expect it to be great. The conditions were right. Who Do We Think We Are tells you something harder to manufacture. When Ritchie Blackmore looks like the conditions are wrong, when the will is absent, when the professional environment has curdled and the creative tank is running on fumes, that's when you find out what someone is actually made of underneath the inspiration and the momentum and the favorable circumstances. What Blackmore was made of, it turns out, was still enough to write Woman from Tokyo, still enough to find the groove on the Rat Back Blue, still enough to close an album with something genuinely moving. Most guitarists would spend a career trying to write any one of those moments on their best day. He wrote all of them on one of his worst. Check out this playlist of more Deep Purple album reviews. Thanks for watching. Please like this video. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you have not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.